The rain drummed against the windows of Zane Zimmerman's 12-year-old Honda Civic as he squinted through the windshield, wipers barely keeping up with the deluge. The 28-year-old construction worker had just finished a grueling double shift when he spotted a pregnant woman doubled over in pain on the sidewalk, one hand clutching her rounded belly, the other desperately trying to flag down a passing car. "Sophie, stay put," Zane instructed his 6-year-old daughter, who was already half asleep in her booster seat. "I need to help someone." Sophie nodded drowsily as Zane pulled to the curb and jumped out, immediately getting soaked as he approached the woman. "Are you okay?" He called over the downpour. The woman looked up, revealing a face contorted in pain but still strikingly beautiful. "My water broke," she gasped. "My driver had an emergency. I need to get to Mercy Hospital now." Without hesitation, Zane guided her to his car. "I've got a booster seat in back with my daughter. Can you make it?" She nodded gratefully, allowing him to help her inside. "Hi," Sophie said, suddenly wide awake as the strange woman settled beside her. "Are you having a baby?" The woman attempted a smile through her pain. "Yes, sweetheart." "Any minute now." "I'm Zane," he said, sliding back into the driver's seat and pulling into traffic. "That's my daughter, Sophie. Don't worry, Mercy is about 15 minutes from here. Just breathe." "Grace," the woman replied between controlled breaths. "Grace Valenti, thank you for stopping." Zane navigated the rain-slicked streets as quickly as safety allowed, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror. Despite being in active labor, there was something undeniably elegant about Grace. Her maternity dress looked expensive, and the diamond studs in her ears probably cost more than his monthly rent. "Daddy's good at helping," Sophie informed Grace proudly. "He fixes everything." Grace managed a strained laugh that turned into a moan. That's good to know." "How far apart are the contractions?" Zane asked, swerving around a slow-moving truck. "Maybe 3 minutes," Grace panted. "It's happening fast." Zane pressed harder on the accelerator. "Sophie, remember how we practiced being Daddy's special helper? I need you to hold Miss Grace's hand and count to 10 when she squeezes, okay?" Sophie nodded solemnly and offered her small hand to Grace, who took it with surprising gentleness despite her pain. 1, 2, 3. Sophie began counting as Grace's face contorted with another contraction. "You have a wonderful daughter," Grace managed when the pain subsided. "She's my whole world," Zane replied, making a sharp turn. "Her mom's not in the picture anymore, it's just us." Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It'll be just me and this little one too." They arrived at the emergency entrance of Mercy Hospital with Grace moaning through another contraction. Zane screeched to a halt and ran inside, returning moments later with a wheelchair and a nurse. "She's close," the nurse assessed as they helped Grace into the chair. Grace grabbed Zane's hand. "Please, could you wait? I don't know anyone in this city yet, and Another contraction cut her off. "We'll wait," Zane promised, surprising himself. He had an early shift tomorrow, but something in her eyes' vulnerability beneath strength made it impossible to refuse. 3 hours later, Sophie was curled up asleep on a waiting room couch while Zane stared into his 5th cup of vending machine coffee. A nurse approached him with a smile. "Miss Valenti is asking for you. She had a healthy baby girl, 7 pounds 3 ounces. Zane followed the nurse, carefully carrying Sophie, who didn't stir. When they entered the room, Grace was propped up against pillows, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. "We made it," she said softly, looking up with tired eyes that somehow sparkled. "Thanks to you." "I didn't do anything special," Zane demurred, settling Sophie gently in a chair. "You did everything," Grace countered. "You stopped when others drove by. You knew exactly what to do. You stayed." She looked down at her daughter. "This is Lily." Zane stepped closer, peering at the tiny red face. "She's beautiful. Would you like to hold her?" Before he could answer, Grace was already transferring the newborn into his arms. It had been years since he'd held a baby this small, but his body remembered. He cradled Lily carefully, a strange ache in his chest. "You're a natural," Grace observed. "I've had some practice," Zane replied, nodding toward Sophie, "though it's been a while." They fell into comfortable silence as Zane rocked the baby gently. Finally, reluctantly, he handed Lily back. "I should get Sophie home to bed," he said. "And you need rest," Grace bit her lip. Could I get your number? I'd like to thank you properly when things settle down. Zane hesitated. Women like Grace, whatever her story, didn't typically move in his circles. But he found himself reciting his number, which she typed into her phone with her free hand. I'll call you, she promised. Zane nodded, not entirely believing her, and gathered Sophie in his arms. Congratulations, Grace. Take care of yourself. And Lily. As he walked out, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. But by morning, practical reality had set in. Women who looked like Grace, who wore diamonds to give birth, didn't typically keep in touch with struggling construction workers they met by chance. He pushed the memory aside and focused on getting Sophie ready for school. 5 days later, his phone rang with an unknown number. Is this Zane? The voice was unmistakable, even over the phone. Grace, he replied, surprised. How are you? How's Lily? We're doing well, she said. I was wondering, would you and Sophie like to come for lunch on Saturday? Nothing fancy, just a thank you meal. I'm a decent cook. Zane hesitated. He'd picked up extra weekend work to cover Sophie's upcoming school supplies. As if sensing his hesitation, Grace added, please. I don't know anyone else in Boston yet, and I could use the company. Something in her voice, a note of loneliness that resonated with his own, made the decision for him. We'd like that. Text me the address. When Saturday arrived, Zane stood before the address Grace had sent, double-checking his phone to make sure he hadn't made a mistake. The building before him was one of Boston's most exclusive high-rises, with a uniformed doorman and gleaming marble visible through the glass doors. Is this where the lady with the baby lives? Sophie asked, bouncing excitedly beside him in her favorite yellow dress. Looks like it, Zane replied, still processing. The doorman approached them with a polite smile. May I help you, sir? We're here to see Grace Valenti, Zane said, feeling distinctly underdressed in his best jeans and button-down shirt. Ah, yes, Miss Valenti is expecting you, penthouse floor. The man gestured toward the elevator bank. Sophie's eyes widened. Penthouse, that means the top, right, Daddy? Like in the movies, Zane nodded, his suspicions confirmed. The woman he'd helped was not just well off, she was wealthy. Very wealthy. The elevator whisked them upward, and Zane used the moments to straighten Sophie's hair ribbon and collect himself. When the doors opened, they stepped directly into a foyer with panoramic views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Grace appeared, holding Lily against her shoulder. She wore simple jeans and a flowing blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking both less formal and even more beautiful than Zane remembered. You came, she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. Sophie, you look so pretty, Sophie beamed. Can I see the baby? Of course. Grace led them to a living area where toys and baby items sat alongside elegant furniture. Would you like to sit and hold her while your dad and I get lunch ready? Sophie nodded eagerly, and Grace carefully placed Lily in her arms, arranging pillows to support them both. Zane felt a swell of pride at how naturally Sophie cradled the newborn. She's good with her, Grace observed as they moved toward the kitchen. She's been asking for a baby brother or sister since she was 3, Zane admitted. Not exactly in the cards for us. The kitchen was a chef's dream of stainless steel and marble. Grace moved comfortably around the space, pulling a roasting pan from the oven. I hope you like lasagna. It's my grandmother's recipe. Smells amazing, Zane said truthfully. But Grace, this place. You didn't mention that I have money, she smiled ruefully. Does it matter? No, but it's a bit intimidating. Grace placed the lasagna on a cooling rack and turned to face him fully. The night we met, I was having the worst day of my life. My baby's father had just informed me he wouldn't be acknowledging our daughter because it might complicate his upcoming Senate campaign. My driver quit when I told him I was in labor. I was standing in the rain, having contractions, thinking I'd have to deliver my baby alone in a city where I know almost no one. Her voice thickened. And then you stopped. You and Sophie, you didn't see wealth or status, you just saw someone who needed help. Zane shrugged, uncomfortable with her intensity. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did. She touched his arm briefly. Money doesn't buy what matters, Zane. I learned that the hard way. Before he could respond, Sophie called from the living room, Daddy. The baby's making funny faces. The moment broke, and they returned to the children. As they ate lunch, Grace explained she'd moved to Boston from Chicago just weeks ago to start fresh, using money from her family's real estate fortune to launch a foundation supporting single parents. "That's how I recognized what a good father you are," she told Zane as Sophie played with Lily on a baby mat nearby. "I've interviewed dozens of single parents for my program. You have that look tired around the edges but completely present for your child." "It's not always easy," Zane admitted. "Construction pays the bills, but the hours are tough. Finding reliable childcare, making every school event, keeping up with homework sometimes I feel like I'm barely treading water." Grace nodded. "That's exactly why I started the foundation. When I found out I was pregnant, I had resources, but felt completely lost. I can't imagine doing it without financial security." Their conversation flowed easily, moving from parenting to their backgrounds. Zane described growing up in a working-class neighborhood, his carpentry apprenticeship, and his dreams of someday having his own custom furniture business. Grace shared stories of her privileged but lonely childhood, her passion for social justice that had made her the black sheep of her wealthy family, and her determination to raise Lily with different values. Before they knew it, hours had passed. Sophie had fallen asleep beside Lily's bassinet, and the afternoon light was fading. "We should get going," Zane said reluctantly. "Of course." Grace looked as disappointed as he felt. "But maybe. Would you both like to come back next weekend? I could make dinner or we could order in." Zane smiled. "We'd like that." What began as a second visit evolved into a regular Saturday tradition. Sometimes they'd stay in, with Grace cooking elaborate meals while Zane fixed things around her penthouse, a leaky faucet, a sticky door, shelves for Lily's growing collection of stuffed animals. Other times, they'd venture out, visiting children's museums with Sophie or strolling through parks with Lily secured in a carrier against Grace's chest. As summer turned to fall, Zane found himself looking forward to Saturdays with an intensity that both excited and terrified him. Grace was not only beautiful and kind, she was smart, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite her wealth. He'd catch himself watching her read stories to Sophie or soothe Lily, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't since he was a teenager. But the differences between them loomed large in his mind. Grace lived in a world of charity galas and trust funds, while he scrambled to cover Sophie's after-school program fees. However easy their friendship felt within the bubble of their Saturday afternoons, the real world existed outside that bubble. One rainy Saturday in October, they decided to stay in. While Sophie entertained Lily, now almost 4 months old and starting to coo and smile, Zane helped Grace prepare dinner. "I've been meaning to ask," Grace said, passing him vegetables to chop. "Sophie mentioned your birthday is coming up next week. We should celebrate." Zane focused intently on dicing an onion. "It's not a big deal. I usually just have cake with Sophie." "That sounds lovely, but maybe this year you'd let me do something special, nothing extravagant," she added quickly, seeing his expression. "Just dinner somewhere nice maybe, my treat, Grace." Zane put down his knife. "You don't have to spend money on me." "It's not about money," she said softly. "It's about celebrating you." The sincerity in her voice made his resistance waver. "I'd have to find a sitter for Sophie. I've already asked Mrs. Chen from your building if she'd watch both girls. Sophie mentioned she babysits sometimes." Zane raised an eyebrow. "You've been plotting." "Guilty," Grace admitted, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. The following Friday evening, Zane found himself dressed in his one good suit, last worn to a cousin's wedding 3 years ago, waiting in the lobby of Grace's building. When she emerged from the elevator, his breath caught. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her curves, her hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. "You look." Words failed him. Grace's smile was shy. "So do you." The restaurant she'd chosen was upscale but comfortable, with private booths and warm lighting. Over plates of perfectly prepared food, they talked with an ease that still surprised Zane. Grace asked about his day, genuinely interested in the renovation project he was working on. He inquired about her foundation's progress, impressed by her determination to create meaningful change. "I have something for you," Grace said as they finished dessert. She handed him a small, wrapped package. You didn't need to open it, she urged gently. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook and a set of high-quality drawing pencils. Zane looked up, puzzled. Sophie showed me your sketches, Grace explained. The furniture designs you draw when you think she's asleep. They're beautiful, Zane. You have real talent. Zane ran his fingers over the smooth leather, strangely touched that she'd noticed this part of him. It's just a hobby. It could be more, Grace leaned forward. My foundation is renovating a building for our new community center. We need custom furniture, desks, bookshelves, activity tables for the childcare space. I'd like to commission you to design and build them. Zane stared at her. Are you serious? Completely. It would be a legitimate contract, good pay, and a showcase for your work. Her eyes held his. This isn't charity, Zane. I've seen your craftsmanship in the things you've fixed at my place. You're exactly who I need for this project. The opportunity was everything he'd dreamed of, a chance to build his portfolio, to work with quality materials, to potentially launch the business he'd always wanted. But doubt crept in. Is this a date? He asked suddenly. Grace blinked, caught off guard. Yes, I hoped it was. But the job offer stands regardless. Because I can't let Sophie down, he said carefully. If I take this job and things between us, if it doesn't work out. I understand, Grace said quietly. Your daughter comes first, mine does too, but Zane. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night in the rain. I've never met anyone like you, someone so genuine, so dedicated, so unimpressed by the things that usually define me. Zane turned his hand to capture hers. I think about you too, all the time, but Grace, we come from different worlds. Do we? She challenged. We're both single parents doing our best. We both want to create something meaningful. We both know what it's like to be let down by someone we trusted. Her voice softened. The only difference is money, and that's the least important thing about either of us. In that moment, looking into her eyes, Zane allowed himself to believe it could be true. He leaned forward and kissed her tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded eagerly. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Grace smiled. Happy birthday, Zane. The following Monday, Zane began work on designs for the community center, using evenings after Sophie went to bed to sketch concepts. Grace provided the specifications but gave him creative freedom, trusting his vision. When he presented his initial designs, her enthusiasm was genuine and her feedback thoughtful. Their relationship deepened as autumn progressed. Weekend visits expanded to include weeknight dinners. Grace would come to his modest apartment, seemingly as comfortable there as in her penthouse. Sophie and Lily formed their own bond, the older girl delighting in the baby's developing personality, but challenges inevitably arose. The first time Zane accompanied Grace to a foundation fundraiser, he felt painfully out of place among Boston's elite. While Grace worked the room, he retreated to a corner, nursing a drink and watching wealthy donors eye him curiously, when Grace introduced him as the talented craftsman designing our center and my boyfriend. Later that night, back at his apartment, the tension finally broke. I don't belong in that world, Grace, Zane said, loosening his tie with frustrated movements. Did you see how they looked at me, like I was some curiosity you dragged in? I don't care how they look at you, Grace replied fiercely. And for the record, several of those donors were incredibly impressed with your designs. The Prescotts want to commission custom pieces for their Cape house. That's not the point, Zane sighed, sinking onto his couch. Even if your rich friends accept me, there's still so much distance between our lives. You casually mentioned flying to Paris for a weekend like it's taking a bus downtown. My idea of splurging is brand name cereal. Grace sat beside him, taking his hands. I know this is complicated. But please don't decide what I want or need based on assumptions. Yes, I grew up with privilege, but the happiest I've ever been is these past months with you and Sophie. Zane searched her face, finding nothing but sincerity. I'm scared, he admitted, not just for me but for Sophie. She's already so attached to you and Lily if this doesn't work. That frightens me too, Grace said softly, but isn't it worth the risk? He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Yes, he whispered, you're worth the risk. As winter descended on Boston, their blended family settled into new routines. Grace hired a part-time nanny who could work flexible hours, allowing Zane to focus on the community center project while ensuring Sophie had consistent care. Weekends often found them all together at either residence, building snowmen, baking cookies, or simply enjoying each other's company. The community center project progressed rapidly. Zane hired 2 experienced carpenters to help with construction, managing his first employees with a mixture of nervousness and pride. When the first pieces were installed, reading nooks with built-in seating, modular desks that could be reconfigured for different activities, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Other commissions followed, just as Grace had predicted. One evening in January, as snow fell softly outside Grace's penthouse windows, the children already asleep in the guest room that had gradually accumulated Sophie's toys and clothes, Grace approached Zane with an uncharacteristically hesitant expression. "I've been thinking," she began, curling beside him on the sofa. "The lease on your apartment is up next month." Zane nodded. "The landlord's raising the rent again. I'm looking at options." "What if?" She took a deep breath. "What if you and Sophie moved in here?" "There's plenty of room, and we're together most of the time anyway." Zane went still. They'd been dating less than 4 months, though it sometimes felt like much longer. "It's too soon," he said finally. "Is it?" Grace challenged. "Life is short, Zane. We're good together. The girls are thriving." "Why wait because some arbitrary timeline says we should? It's not just about us," he reminded her. "Sophie's stable now, but she went through a lot when her mother left. Moving in together is a big step, which is why I've been talking to Dr. Larson." Grace referenced the child psychologist she'd consulted about blending their families. "She thinks Sophie is remarkably well adjusted, and that as long as we're clear with both girls that this is a commitment, not an experiment, the transition could be very positive." Zane raised an eyebrow. "You've really thought this through." "I have," Grace admitted, "but I understand if you need more time." Zane pulled her closer. "I don't need more time to know how I feel about you," he said quietly. "I love you, Grace. I think I have since that night in the rain." Joy bloomed across her face. "I love you too, so much. But moving in together, it's a big step financially too. I'd need to contribute. We can figure that out," Grace interrupted. "Maybe you pay for groceries and daily expenses while I handle the mortgage, or we could open a joint account for household costs." She took his hand. "I don't care about the money, Zane. I care about building a life with you." The sincerity in her eyes broke down the last of his resistance. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it. Let's move in together." Their first weeks of cohabitation were an adjustment for everyone. Sophie was thrilled to have a room that Grace helped her decorate, complete with a loft, bed, and art station, but she sometimes grew quieter than usual, processing the changes. Zane struggled with the luxury of the penthouse, feeling like a visitor in his own home. Grace occasionally bristled when Zane questioned expenses she considered negligible, yet gradually, they found their rhythm. Zane converted a spare room into a home office where he could work on designs. Grace learned to consult him before making major purchases that affected the family. They established traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, Friday movie nights, daily walks when weather permitted. By spring, the community center was completed. At the grand opening, Zane stood beside Grace as she cut the ribbon, his custom-designed furniture drawing admiration from attendees. Watching children immediately gravitate to the reading nooks and activity stations he'd built, Zane felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "You did this," Grace whispered, squeezing his hand. "We did this," he corrected. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, Grace found Zane on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I was thinking about how much has changed in less than a year," he said, turning to face her. "Last summer, I was working double shifts to make rent, worrying about Sophie's fall school supplies. Now I'm launching my own business, living in a penthouse with the most amazing woman I've ever met." "Having second thoughts?" Grace asked, only half joking. "The opposite." Zane reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I was going to wait, plan something elaborate, but standing here with you after today, it feels right." Grace's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a ring not ostentatiously large, but beautifully designed with an emerald-cut diamond in a vintage setting. "I sold my truck," Zane said softly. "I know it's not what you're used to, but it's perfect," Grace interrupted, tears filling her eyes. "You're perfect." Zane took a deep breath. "Grace Valenti, I never expected you. I never thought someone like me could find someone like you. But every day with you makes me believe in possibilities I'd given up on. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, catching the city lights as Zane pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime. Their engagement announcement surprised no one who knew them. Grace's wealthy circle accepted it with varying degrees of enthusiasm, some genuinely happy for her, others clearly assuming it wouldn't last. Zane's friends and family embraced Grace warmly, appreciative of her lack of pretension and obvious love for both Zane and Sophie. They decided on a fall wedding, giving themselves time to plan and the children time to adjust. Sophie was delighted to be a flower girl, and Lily, now crawling and babbling, would be carried down the aisle by Grace's closest friend. As wedding plans progressed, so did Zane's business. The publicity from the community center led to a steady stream of commissions. He leased a small workshop space and hired another craftsman, focusing on high-end custom pieces that showcased his talent while commanding prices that made the business sustainable. One evening in August, as they finalized wedding details, Grace brought up a sensitive subject. "I'd like to formally adopt Sophie after we're married," she said carefully. "If you're comfortable with that, and I'd like you to adopt Lily." Zane looked up from the seating chart they'd been working on, surprised. "You'd want that, for me to legally be Lily's father?" "Of course I would," Grace said. "You already are in every way that matters. You're the one who taught her to roll over, who walks the floor with her when she's teething. You're her dad, Zane." Emotion tightened his throat. "And you're already Sophie's mom in all the important ways, too." "So we'll make it official," Grace said, her eyes shining. "One family, legally and in our hearts." The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, ideal September weather. They'd chosen a small botanical garden for the ceremony, with just 80 guests, a compromise between Grace's social obligations and Zane's preference for intimacy. In the bridal suite, Grace adjusted her simple but elegant gown, an ivory sheath with subtle beading that complemented her figure without overwhelming it. Sophie twirled nearby in her flower girl dress, while Lily, now standing with assistants, grabbed at the rose petals scattered on the floor. "You look like a princess, Mommy," Sophie said, the term still new but used with increasing frequency. Grace's heart swelled. "Thank you, sweet girl. Are you ready for our big day?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "I practiced throwing the petals lots of times with Daddy." In another room, Zane adjusted his tie, his best friend and now business partner, Miguel, slapping him on the back. "Never thought I'd see the day," Miguel teased. "The most commitment-shy guy I know, marrying Boston's most eligible heiress." "When you know," Zane replied simply. The ceremony was everything they'd hoped for. Sophie performed her flower girl duties with adorable concentration. Lily, carried by Grace's friend Eliza, babbled happily throughout. When Grace appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her gown, Zane felt tears prick his eyes. Their vows were personal and heartfelt. Zane spoke of unexpected second chances and finding love in the rain. Grace promised to cherish not just him but the family they were building together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was met with enthusiastic applause, Sophie's cheer the loudest of all. The reception flowed seamlessly from elegant dinner to lively dancing. Zane had worried about feeling out of place, but with Grace beside him, he found himself enjoying every moment, including the traditional first dance, which they'd practiced for weeks. "Happy," Grace murmured against his ear as they swayed together. "Beyond words," Zane replied, tightening his arms around her. "I keep expecting to wake up. Not a dream," she assured him, "though I pinched myself a few times during the ceremony just to be sure." Later, as the party continued, they slipped away briefly to put the tired children to bed in the garden's guest cottage, where Grace's parents had offered to stay overnight with them. Tomorrow, Zane and Grace would leave for a 10-day honeymoon in Italy, their first extended time alone since meeting. "They're finally asleep," Grace whispered, closing the bedroom door softly behind them. In the dim hallway, she stepped into Zane's arms. "Should we get back to our guests?" Zane gazed down at her, memorizing the moment, the happiness in her eyes, the way her hair was coming loose from its elegant updo, the slight smudge of her lipstick from their kisses. "1 minute," he said, holding her close. "I just want to remember this exactly as it is, the first day of our life together." Grace rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "The first of many thousands." "I still can't believe how this all started," Zane mused. "If it hadn't been raining that night, if I'd taken a different route home, we would have found each other somehow," Grace said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be." Returning to the reception, they danced and celebrated until well past midnight, surrounded by loved ones and the palpable warmth of shared joy. The honeymoon was a revelation for both of them. Grace, who had traveled extensively but always with an entourage or for business, delighted in experiencing Italy through Zane's fresh perspective. Zane, who had never been outside the United States, absorbed everything with wonder: the architecture, the craftsmanship, the food, the language. In Venice, they got lost in narrow alleyways, finding tiny restaurants where the owners treated them like family. In Florence, Zane spent hours studying Renaissance furniture in museums, filling his sketchbook with inspired designs. In the Tuscan countryside, they stayed at a villa where Grace surprised Zane with a private workshop tour from a master woodworker, whose family had been crafting furniture for 7 generations. "This is the best gift anyone's ever given me," Zane told her as they walked back to their villa, the Italian sunset painting the hills gold. "Not just the workshop, this whole experience, seeing the world with you." "There's more world to see," Grace replied, swinging their clasped hands. "And a lifetime to see it together." Their return home brought the sweet reunion with the children and the beginning of their new normal as a married family. The adoption process began, with both biological parents signing the necessary paperwork, Grace's ex reluctantly agreeing after his political aspirations hit other scandals, Sophie's mother having long since relinquished her rights. As Christmas approached, their first as a legally united family, Zane surprised Grace with his own gift plans for a house he'd designed himself. "The penthouse is beautiful," he explained as she examined the blueprints with growing excitement. "But I want our children to have a yard, a neighborhood, rooms they can make noise in without worrying about neighbors below. I found land just outside the city close enough for your foundation work, but with space to breathe." Grace traced the designs with tender appreciation. "It's perfect, Zane, absolutely perfect." She looked up with a mischievous smile. "And actually, it might be exactly what we need, considering my news." Zane raised an eyebrow. "What news?" "We might need that extra bedroom sooner than we thought." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant." Joy exploded through Zane, followed immediately by concern. "Are you feeling okay? When did you find out? Have you seen a doctor?" Grace laughed, placing a finger on his lips. "Yes, last week, and yes, everything looks great. We're having a baby, Zane, our baby." Zane gathered her in his arms, lifting her off the ground in his enthusiasm. "Our baby," he repeated in wonder. "Another little person with your smile and hopefully your brains. And your creativity and heart," Grace added, kissing him softly. The following spring, their house was completed just in time. Modern but warm, with custom features Zane had built himself, including a tree house for the children and a studio where he could work from home when needed. Grace's foundation continued to thrive, expanding its programs to 3 more locations across the state. In June, exactly 2 years after that rainy night when fate brought them together, their son was born, James Miguel Zimmerman, 9 pounds of healthy, strong baby boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determined chin. "Full circle," Grace whispered as Zane held their son for the first time, Sophie and Lily peering eagerly at their new brother. "From that first car ride to the hospital to this moment right here." Zane looked around at his family, Sophie, now 8 and flourishing in school, Lily talking in full sentences at nearly 2, newborn James blinking up at him. and Grace, beautiful Grace, tired but radiant after bringing their child into the world. "I used to think struggling was just my lot in life," he said softly. "Working hard just to stay afloat, never getting ahead. But now I understand that the struggle brought me exactly where I was supposed to be in the rain that night, helping a woman I didn't know, not having any idea she would change everything." "For both of us," Grace agreed, reaching for his hand. "You stopped to help a stranger, and I found the love of my life." Sophie climbed carefully onto the hospital bed, mindful of her mother's soreness. "Can I hold James now? I practiced with my doll." "Me too," Lily insisted, not to be outdone. As Zane helped Sophie support the baby correctly, then lifted Lily onto his lap for her turn, Grace watched her family with a heart so full it ached. The wealth she'd been born with had given her opportunities and security, but it had never given her the simple, profound joy of belonging completely to these people who loved her not for her name or her money, but simply for herself. 5 years later, the Zimmerman family gathered on their sprawling back lawn for a summer barbecue. Friends and extended family milled about, enjoying the perfect weather and the festive atmosphere. Zane, now the owner of Zimmerman Custom Designs, a thriving business with 15 employees and a 6-month waiting list, manned the grill with practiced ease. Grace moved through the gathering, their youngest daughter, 3-year-old Clara, on her hip. The foundation had expanded nationally, with Grace serving as chairperson, but delegating more operational responsibilities to spend time with her family. Sophie, now 13 and showing artistic talent of her own, helped 10-year-old Lily organize games for the younger children, while 7-year-old James chased the family's golden retriever through the sprinkler. As afternoon mellowed into evening and guests began to depart, Zane found Grace on the porch swing, watching the sunset. "Quite a life we've built," he said, settling beside her. "The best life," she agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "You know what today is, don't you?" Zane smiled. 7 years since I found a very pregnant, very determined woman in the rain." 7 years, Grace marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like I've loved you forever." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter as Sophie led her siblings in a game of tag. The dog barked joyfully, chasing alongside them. "Worth the struggle," Zane murmured, kissing Grace's temple. "Every minute of it." "Worth the rain," Grace replied, turning her face to meet his kiss. "Every single drop." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch swing, hands intertwined. Watching their children play in the yard of the home, they'd built together two people from different worlds who had found, in each other, the same destination.